Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's 1 o'clock, October the 19th. Call this meeting to order, and we'll do our roll call. Councillor McCray. Here.
Present.
Councillor Dunsmore.
Present.
Councillor Kittredge.
Present.
Councillor McElwain.
Present.
Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Present.
Councillor Foster. Okay, we are all here. And ask if there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest with anything on the agenda today. Okay, seeing none, I have a recommendation for confirmation of the agenda that the Council of Township Centre Wellington confirm the agenda for the meeting held October 19th, 2020. Mover for that? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCray. All in favor? And that's carried. We have two sets of minutes from Committee of the Whole on September the 8th and Committee of the Whole on September 21st. I have a recommendation that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meetings held September 8th, 2020 and September 21st, 2020 be adopted as circulated. Moving for that, please. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCray. All in favor? And those minutes are passed. No delegations today. Get right into reports. We have our 2020 Annual Emergency Program report from the Emergency Manager for the county, newly in her role. Welcome, Haranya, and I'll pass things over to you at this point.
Great, thank you so much, through you, Your Worship. So this report outlines how the township has met the Emergency Management Civil Protection Act requirements for 2020. So I'm just going to go over some of the highlights. So for program committee requirement, the committee at the township met on March 3rd to review the township's emergency management program, including the hazard identification and risk assessment, emergency response plan, training needs, proposed annual exercise, and public education. Those minutes from the committees were attached to this report. In terms of the emergency response plan, Linda brought a report and bylaw on September 28th to council, and this was actually approved. So that's something that I will share with the Office of the Fire Marshal and Emergency Management as part of compliance. So in terms of training, the township's Municipal Emergency Control Group, both primary and alternate members, have satisfied the training requirements for this year. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, the additional training was quite limited this year, but we were able to do some training on the new EOC software, and that is ongoing. And so in terms of the annual emergency management exercise, so actually the Chief of Emergency Management Ontario provided an exemption to this requirement in the regulation for all Ontario municipalities since we've been living through this emergency. So then public education, so we worked hand in hand with emergency management staff, with communication staff and member municipal communication staff during the COVID-19 response, and that's of course ongoing, as well as accessing our non-face-to-face platforms, so the Wellington advertisers, local radio stations, our websites, social media, and we use those as well throughout Emergency Preparedness Week, which was May 3rd to 9th. We also were able to revise the Be Better Prepared guides this year, and they were distributed through the Wellington advertiser in June. And we did the Do One Thing promotion again throughout each month with a different targeted education plan. So in summary, the township has satisfied the requirements of the Emergency Management Civil Protection Act, Ontario Regulation 380-04 for 2020. So that's my report for today, unless there are any other questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Haranya. I know it's tough to start a new role in the middle of COVID, but appreciate you coming to talk to us today. Questions from council? Councillor Foster, anything? Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Nope, nothing. Thanks always again for all the training that you do for the township.
Councillor McElwain,
Nothing.
Councillor Kittrus,
No questions.
Councillor Dunsmore,
No questions. Thanks for the report.
Councillor McCray.
Yes, I have one question regarding number 8 of the minutes, the training plan for 2020 to 2025. Just sort of a suggestion, could the elected officials course that runs every 4 years be mandatory as opposed to optional? Given the fact that previous discussions, a lot of councillors expressed an interest in wanting to have more participation in emergency management decisions, I think it's only appropriate that they get the training.
Through you, Your Worship. Thank you for the question. So that's definitely something we can do. That's something that we could bring up as part of the committee meetings that we generally run with the control groups at the beginning of the new year. So I can add that to the agenda to make sure that that's something we discuss, and then we can move forward with that way.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to respond to Councillor McCray's comments about the mandatory. I think that if the emergency bylaw that we passed last week had included all of councillors to be notified when emergency happens, then it would make sense to have it as mandatory. But as it did exclude local councillors, then I don't think that it should be mandatory, because we seem to be like, you have to have both sides of it. You have to have the side where you're notified, but then if you have it mandatory, you have no powers about it. So I think that that needs to be added to our emergency bylaw, as I had suggested previously, and then consideration could be made for mandatory.
As Councillor Harania has said that we will be looking into this. She'll add this to the agenda at the next time that we talk about this training plan. So I think your comments are good, and they'll be brought to the table, and we'll try to do something that's consistent across the whole county for sure. I'll read the recommendation that the Township of Center Wellington Council receives Emergency Management Report EM 2020-02 dated September 28th regarding the status of the Township's Emergency Management Program for 2020, and further that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington accepts the annual status report of the Township's Emergency Management Program for 2020. Move for that recommendation. Councillor McElwain, seconded by Councillor Foster. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much, Rania.
Thank you.
Moving on to 7.2, half load weight restrictions bylaw update, and we have a report from our Manager of Public Works, Rob Rosso. Go ahead, Rob.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Through you, Mayor Linton. Good afternoon, Council. Before you is a report today for half load weight restriction bylaw. It's just an amendment to the bylaw of 9939. So this is this new bylaw just has updated mapping and a little more language to help us if there are litigation purposes, and yeah, work together with Paul Dre on this one, and also Colin Baker. So pretty straightforward, and here to answer any questions if you have any.
Thanks very much, Rob. And just to clarify, just to further reiterate what Rob said, we do have Paul Dre on the call here as well, and Colin. So we have a team that put this together here to answer any questions that council has. Questions from council? Councilor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. The only question I have is related to section 7.2C, where it talks about no vehicle transporting live poultry. What about live pigs, sheep, cattle? Would those not also have some load concerns?
Rob, are you the best one to answer this one?
That might be Paul, actually.
Right away, Paul, into the fire.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Certainly we can change that to live poultry and livestock. That's a friendly amendment. That's fine.
Thank you. Councillor Dunsmore? Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a question. In the mapping here, throughout Salem, is there transport allowed through Salem on County Road? I think it's 18.
Yes, through you, Mayor Linton. All county roads in our area have no weight restrictions.
Okay.
Yeah, follow on, Councillor Kittrus. You're still on mute, Councillor Kittrus.
Thank you, Mayor. That being said, can you give me a clarification about the red roads that are marked red as being half loads? Because there's some that go through, they're county roads that are through the towns, like Elora. And so I'm just wondering, like, does that mean transports are not allowed to make deliveries there?
Transports are permitted on the roads during half season, but they have to abide by the half load limit.
Okay.
Councillor Kittrus. You're still on mute, Councillor Kittrus.
Thank you, Mayor. How will all the transport companies know about this half load restrictions? And what will be the consequences for that? I'm not following that.
So that would be enforceable by the OPP, and all of our roads that are weight restricted are signed. So the only roads that aren't signed are within the township roads, but they all fall under the same restriction. But you'll notice if you're out and about, all our rural roads, all those roads are signed half load. And it's
Councillor McLean? Did they cut you off? You wanted to say something else, Rob?
No, that's okay. I was just going to say that all Ontario roads are the same, follow the same process. So most companies are aware of half load season.
Councillor McLean?
Thanks, Mayor. Just following up to your previous response to Steve, is there any significant difference between this year's half loads and restrictions than previous years?
think if I understand through you, Mayor Linton, if I understand you correctly, are you asking if there's any roads that we currently had now that are not half load?
No, I'm basically asking, are there any significant differences this winter from last winter for half loads and for limited loads in the township?
No, there's no difference in that aspect.
Thanks, Councilor Backward. That was my question too. Councilor Van Leeuwen?
No further questions. That's what I was wondering. Are the dates the same? Everything's the same?
Yes.
Councilor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. My question, I think will be for Colin or perhaps for Rob Rosso. My question is, do we get any feedback from the OPP when they issue a ticket for exceeding the load limits in the springtime? Do we have any statistics on how many tickets or infractions were issued in a March-April season? Do we know if it's being enforced?
I can answer that maybe, Colin, through you, Mayor Linton. A few years ago, our superintendent's roads committee purchased weigh scales for the OPP to use. And I know that I have personally reached out to them on the township's behalf for trucks not following the guidelines for the bylaw, and they actually do enforce. I don't have the stats with me today, but if that's something you wanted, I could probably get those from the OPP.
Councilor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I'd like to know how many tickets were issued in 2019 in March, April for exceeding our load limits, and how many tickets in 2018, very specifically, if I can, Rob. I'd like to know that'll tell us whether it's being enforced or not enforced. And we all know that we have some very difficult rural roads, and this is something that is contributing to degrading our rural roads when limits are exceeded. So I'd really like to know how many tickets exactly have been issued each spring breakup season.
Is that doable, Rob?
All I can do is reach out to the OPP and see if they'll provide that information for us.
So that'd be great. And if you could do that and then send it to all council, we appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay, I have a recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington authorize the mayor and municipal clerk to execute a bylaw to amend bylaw 99-39 as amended, a bylaw to regulate reduced load limits on township roadways. Mover for that recommendation, Councilor Foster, seconded by Councilor Dunsmore. All in favor? And that is carried. Thanks, Rob. Moving on to the draft vital services bylaw, a report from our municipal law enforcement officer, Satnam, and I will turn it over to you right now, Satnam. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. As part of the municipal law enforcement strategy development, the township staff have been working to identify areas of concerns for residents as we all get ready to prepare for the cold weather that winter brings. I believe I speak for everyone when I say that we need to protect our residents and ensure that we have a warm place to live, access to water and electricity. This bylaw is only in effect from November 1st to April 1st of the following year, as it's specific to the risks posed by cold weather. Currently, issues associated with heat, water, and electricity are addressed under the property standards bylaw. However, due to the minimum time to comply that's required under the property standards order being 19 days, such delays can be critical, especially for any vulnerable demographics. Under the proposed bylaw, staff will be able to issue orders with a more appropriate timeline for compliance. This bylaw is not applicable when there is a controlled shutdown of vital services due to repairs. However, it does require timely response for restoration. Staff also recognize that delays may occur in acquiring a technician to restore these vital services. And if a vital service or if a landlord can demonstrate they are working towards compliance and are able to provide temporary assistance through the use of portable heaters or other devices while these services are being restored, officers will utilize discretion and may allow the property owner a little bit more time to get that matter restored and forgo any charges. It should also be noted that this bylaw is not applicable in instances where the tenant is responsible for payment of vital services to the service provider, and as a result, there's a halt to services due to a non-payment or a breach within their contractual agreement with the service provider. This bylaw will allow municipal law enforcement officers to issue orders with as little as 24 hours to restore vital service. Failure to restore these services within prescribed time will result in set fines or fines for every day that the vital service is not restored. To you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much, Satnam. An important bylaw, given our times we live in right now. Turn things over to councilors. Councilor Foster, anything? Councilor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks, through you, Mayor. I'm glad you put in there, it's called vital services, means hot or cold water, fuel, electricity, gas, or heat. Should it just more speak towards fuel, electricity, gas related to heat? Because otherwise the word fuel and electricity step outside of the idea of hot water and heat. So just, because if I read it and it said fuel, I was like, well, technically fuel could be anything. So as a vital service, it should be fuel, gas related to heat.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I agree. I mean, we could perhaps revise the wording on that. It is specifically applicable to heat, mainly within the winter months. Yeah, we can do that.
So once I go through all the councilors, I want to make sure that we have the wording of this amendment right. Councilor McElwain?
I have nothing. Thank you.
Councilor Kitchus?
No, I don't have any questions.
Councilor Dunsmore?
No questions.
Councilor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. First of all, I'd like to say it's great to see that we are a compassionate community in terms of thinking about our citizens who may need our assistance. One of the concerns I have about this is while it addresses sort of the winter period, we are seeing, due to climate change, increasing temperatures during the summer. Should this thing be extended to also address the need to have electricity during the summer months so that a person can cool themselves in their place of residence?
So, sorry, my apologies.
No, I've got 3 questions, so maybe if you could answer this one first, please, Satnam.
Okay, sure. Through you, Mayor. Mayor Linton. So we do have the property standards bylaw that I believe addresses air conditioning. I'd have to verify that. I can check through that for you. With this bylaw, it's more so for immediate concerns specific to the impact that cold weather can have. With air conditioning and things of that nature, there's usually a slow progression towards warmer months. And then if an order is required, a property standards order may be more applicable within 19 days to comply. So I would suggest leaving it as under the property standards bylaw. However, through you and or for Mr. Mayor and the council, I'm open to recommendations.
Thank you, Satnam. My concern is we are seeing, steady increases in temperature and humidity, and that can be quite uncomfortable. And having to wait the 19 days or something under the property standards. By that point, it may be too late for an individual in terms of the suffering they're having to go through during that period of waiting for something to be addressed. So I'm throwing it out there as consideration. Could we include the summer months as well when we can get these extreme temperatures? My second question is, would fines increase daily to spur a response from a landlord, or would the fines remain at the same amount each time?
So we're going to be proposing set fines to the Ministry of Attorney General with minimum of $200 per day, and it's a reoccurring offense. So every day that violation is or is not brought into compliance, we can proceed with charges per day. Having said that, we also have the option of proceeding with Part 3 charges, which would result in proceeding to the provincial court and having justice of peace determine a resolution. And that could be greater fine.
Just, in some cases, one could consider $200 fine just a cost of doing business, and it would just be disregarded. So I would like to see that we do have the teeth to make it happen if we need to. My third question is more just a general question of who covers the cost if a tenant has to vacate their residence while waiting for electricity or heat to be restored, assuming this was to take several days and couldn't change in 24 hours.
Unfortunately, this bylaw does not capture that. What we would do is if a tenant does not have heat, we would advise the property owner or landlord to provide them with temporary solutions such as portable heating until that vital service is restored.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, councillors. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Dre for his thoughts on wording. We had a suggested word change from Councillor Van Leeuwen, and then Councillor McCrae mentioned a couple things as well. My concern is the enforceability of this act, and that's where Mr. Dre came to provide some assistance. So I'd like him to kind of provide some comments based on what he's heard from councillors. Paul?
With regard to vital service, changing that definition, I don't like to provide like legal advice on the fly, but the fuel in there, because fuels are changing, it could be solar fuel, it could be a whole number of things now as we move forward. So I think this covers hot and cold water, fuel, electricity, gas, or heat, and it covers off sort of the large gamut. I'd be remiss in sort of changing that word, and I heard the counselor, I understand, but I just feel that is a word we should leave in. With regard to air conditioning and those type of things, the Vital Services Act is really, what it is, and it's a vital service. And municipalities of Ontario basically all use the same formula that we're proposing in Center Wellington currently, and that is the times from November on. And my suggestion here would be that the bylaw enforcement staff monitor. If they get complaints with regard to problems in the summer, they log those and come back to council possibly with that. At this time, I don't believe we get a lot of complaints, or maybe I'm misapprehending it, but in the summer with air conditioning, and it is addressed in the property standards, but it only addresses that it has to be working properly if you have it. There's no requirement to have, and I don't believe air conditioning at this point in the province of Ontario has been deemed a vital service. So unfortunately, for some people, it may be very uncomfortable, but I don't believe it's a vital service by law. Does that answer the questions, Mayor Linton?
Yeah, it does provide some context, and this is really getting to that vital services definition. So we want to make sure that we're consistent and this bylaw is enforceable. So I think that helps us. Councillor McCrae?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Referring back to Paul Dre's comments, maybe air conditioning is not the appropriate word I should use, but I'm just thinking more of air movement. So having a fan where you can allow some sort of flow of air through the room to allow a way to disperse the hot air that's accumulating inside an apartment. That's more what I'm thinking.
And it may be something, Councillor, that, like I say, if complaints come in, it's something that we can look at and revisit. But I think this addresses the cold season coming on, if that's fair, at this point.
No, that's fine. I like the approach then that we monitor if we are getting complaints about the summer conditions. Yeah.
Okay, I'll read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington authorizes the mayor and clerk to execute a bylaw for the purposes of protecting tenants from unjust service disruptions to their right to water, heat, and electricity, known as the Vital Services Bylaw. I have a mover for that recommendation, please. Councillor McElwain, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much, Sutton. Moving on to 7.4, draft littering bylaw. A lot of residents will be happy to see this, and I'll turn it back over to our municipal law enforcement officer.
Yeah, so, through you, Mr. Mayor, the littering bylaw was drafted with the help of Paul Dre Associates, or Legal Services Professional Corporation, as part of the township's objectives of maintaining a clean and healthy municipality, and as part of the township's review and development of its municipal law enforcement strategy. We have drafted the proposed bylaw to keep those accountable that choose to forego responsible disposal of their waste onto someone else's property, making it their issue. The proposed bylaw will address what is currently an unenforceable matter by the township, which directly impacts roadways, trails, public services, and private property. Additionally, the enactment of this bylaw provides a general deterrence for littering activity. Currently, the township's only recourse for illegal dumping is to either clean it up from the township property or issue a property standards order to the property owner, which isn't quite fair to the property owner as they didn't create the mess. Depending on the circumstances, staff will have the option of issuing a monetary penalty through Part 1 fine or a Part 3 charge through for more large-scale offenders, whereby we have just the police decide on the final outcome of fines and other action. Furthermore, once we identify the persons who have committed the act of littering, you may be asking, what are we going to do about the waste? It's not going to clean itself up. And to this end, there's a bit of officer discretion that's required. Civil legal action is an option that may be initiated by the property owner against the accused or the township property. Another option is to have the offender clean up the waste. This is at the sole discretion of the applicable property owner. This bylaw, it's not foolproof. It will require assistance from the public to help identify people they see dumping material. However, with the help of the public and our enforcement tools, staff will be able to provide an avenue to hold these illegal dumping or dumpers accountable. To that end, over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Satnam. And again, we have Paul Dre here to also help Satnam with any questions that he has. Councillors, Councillor McCrae?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I have a couple of questions. My first question is, I guess comment is, would you consider adding a definition of watercourse to the definitions? Because I'm not sure if everyone understands what a watercourse actually is.
That is a good point. I don't believe we have that in there. I can defer to Paul Dre if he has any comments on that.
I'm not opposed to adding it. I don't know whether it is that helpful because sometimes any water course doesn't have water. So it may or may not be helpful. Any water course, I think, usually is defined and set out either by the conservation or the Grand River and or any mapping that you have with regard to water courses. I'm not aware of, Councillor, of any municipality that defines water course, but I can certainly make those inquiries. I wouldn't be opposed to defining it, but I would want to get the right definition so it doesn't affect the rest of the bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Dre, because my understanding of water course is that's the actual channel that the water's running in. So pitching something into the water as opposed to pitching something onto the banks of the river. So it's understanding what that difference is between in the water as opposed to on the side of the water channel. That's sort of my understanding of water course. My second question is, could you add a definition of what a Part 1 offense is? because having read about it, I didn't know what a Part 1 offense meant.
Well, the Provincial Offences Act sets that out very clearly, and Part 1 offenses are basically ticketable offenses. So when we refer to it here, it's just basically a ticket. And when you issue that ticket, the Provincial Offences Act also sets out there's a maximum fine for that ticket. So we can have set fines, which are proposed at the back of the bylaw. They haven't been approved yet, but those are what is being suggested here for the tickets. And the maximum on a ticket is $1,000. If you go the other route, like a Part 3, a Part 1 is just a ticket. Part 3 is an in-court appearance. So that's the difference. I don't know whether it'd be that helpful to define it. I haven't seen it defined in a bylaw, but it does say at the back, Part 1, if it's preceded by Part 1 under the provincial offenses, the maximum as provided, and I'm telling you it's $1,000. So that, I don't know if it's helpful or not, Councillor.
It's just, I'm thinking from the layman's perspective, unless I want to go and look up the Provincial Offences Act to see what a Part 1, it's nice to have everything just in the actual document. If someone's coming to me to talk to me about draft littering bylaw and they said, hey, what about this Part 1 offense? At least I know what that means, as does the individual. I'm just thinking for ease of understanding for the layman.
I think, if I might, Councillor, Section 7.6 sets it out. Every person who has issued a Part 1 offense notice or summons, and sort of the friendly addition there that I might consider is in brackets ticket. Would that be fair? That sets it out, and we wouldn't have to define it, but it would say ticket in there. I think that's a friendly amendment. Nothing really changes there. It's just we're saying a Part 1 offense notice or summons, and in brackets just say ticket.
No, ticket would be fine.
Okay.
Just helps to clarify it.
If council agrees, I'll just make that note. Thank you. Okay.
My other question is related to Section 7.9. How do you propose collecting from a non-resident? Because you talk about the tax roll, but what if the litter is from out of town? How will we collect?
It's in that section, that Councillor, it says owing the costs by initiating court proceedings or by adding the costs.
Yeah.
So if it's someone from out of town, you can do a small claim in any court. You can do it here, the small claim against the person from another jurisdiction. Not a problem.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is I'll correct it to Satnam first and we'll go from there. It's about enforcement. We have a lot of litter going on, and I see pictures of our trailheads, pictures of roadways that are covered with litter, and people have seen them do it. Now, the enforcement in this bylaw says it's an officer, so I'm assuming, Satnam, that's you. But I think somewhere along the line we need to have a procedure of what a resident can do if they see somebody dumping litter, or if they notice that they've got cameras on their property that show the same people coming back and forth. What's the procedure for residents to issue a violation or to get you involved? How are we going to lay that out, and where are we going to lay it out?
So is that in terms of the enforcement practice or how we're promoting it to the public?
Well, how are we going to enforce this bylaw? So you can't be everywhere. You're one guy. So if I see somebody dumping something somewhere and I get a picture of their license plate, is it a simple matter of just emailing that to the township, or how? Explain to me how you see a citizen contacting you. What's the process for a citizen to complain so that we can get action on the litter?
Yeah, so initially we'd want the citizen to contact myself directly. If they have a license plate, great. I mean, sometimes people do leave mailing addresses and things in their garbage that they dump. It does happen. I've seen it in the past. And so if they do have a license plate and a description of the person, if they provide that to me, we are currently going through a process through the Ministry of Transportation to utilize authorized requests for information services. which is basically a tool for law enforcement to identify the owners of vehicles through their license plates. And so through that, we'd be able to locate the applicable property owner or the vehicle owner and issue the ticket to them.
Councilor Dunsmore?
So Paul, I'm not thinking we should be putting this in that procedure in the bylaw. I think it makes it too complicated. But we do need to get that procedure between you and Satnam out to the public somehow. So what are your thoughts on where we put that procedure so that the public is educated on how to help us enforce this?
If I might, Counselor, one of the things that Satnam says in the report, one of the things is education, and one of the things now, you've got the bylaw. I think what you want to do is get your communications person to do a press release and to tell people that they can contact if they see a car or they see somebody dumping tires or they see somebody dumping or littering, that they can contact the municipality and the municipality will take every step to try and correct the situation. And many times with garbage, people leave their bills in their garbage and dump it. You know, there's many ways, but we have to get that to people. If you see it, get us a license number, and with that license number, it may be a telephone bill or a hydro bill in the garbage, that allows us then to take those people to court or to try and collect it. So I think it's a communication, and once this bylaw is in place, if you can get your communication people to work on a press release and advise people how to contact Satnam, and I think that's getting the word out. I think that would be a wonderful idea.
I think it makes a lot of sense is once we have this bylaw in place is that our communications coordinator will work with the clerk's office to make sure that we get social media out, make sure we get a press release out so that people are aware of what it is and make it as user-friendly as possible so that the key messages are out there and the number to call is out there and people understand what they're supposed to do if they see what they're doing. So I think that's kind of the next step after we pass this bylaw. Councilor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few questions. I'm wondering about just generally the provisions for garbage containers to reduce littering, especially for out-of-town people and people on our trails. Are there any provisions to do that? That's my first question.
So I don't think that'd be something that'd be done through this bylaw. Maybe conversation parks.
I know, if I might, Mr. Mayor, I know I've been working with the township on a parks bylaw. It's not being to council, but that may be something to consider in the parks and trails bylaw.
Andy's going to speak to that as well.
Yeah, also from an operational perspective, we work with both the downtowns as well as our trail groups in any locations where we see a continuation of garbage or an overflowing, then we do try to accommodate that by taking out additional garbage bins. I know in the last few years we've added staff throughout the weekends for garbage collection in the downtowns as well as extra bins. So that's something we continuously monitor as well. And I was going to say the same as with Paul, that we're working on parks bylaw. So we'll look at some of those components as well through that bylaw.
Councilor Kittrus, follow up?
Thank you, Mayor. I realize that the fining schedule here is not part of the bylaw, but I have some, from 1 to 8, they're all on private property, but it says in the bylaw you're not going to be monitoring private. And so I'm just wondering, as Councillor Dunsmore said about the procedure for this, what is going to be done for private property owners on their private property?
It's complaint based, right?
Yeah, so complaint based. So if a resident contacts us, lets us know that, hey, they witnessed somebody dump waste on their property, that's what that would be applicable to. The second half, so that's just the sections 1 through 8 are, it's laid out that way because of the definitions of the provisions within the bylaw. And we have to encapsulate everything that was within that bylaw.
If I might just help a bit here, Satnam, when we discussed this, we looked at these and they all need to be revamped, councillors. So where it says cause debris to be thrown on private property, the actual section just says on property without the consent of the owner. So it includes private property and public property, means any land, highway, or park within the township. So it's all inclusive, and we will work, or Satnam will work on getting these wordings more consistent with the bylaw. This was the first draft, and this was, no, I didn't really look at these wordings other than to say they need to be revamped once the bylaws passed.
But the idea would be not to make a distinction between private and public property, and property be litter without the owner's permission.
That's right.
Okay.
So like if we look at 3.1 going down, it would say throw, place, like slash dump on property, not private property, because we've defined property means any land, highway, or park within the township, which includes both public and private.
Okay, so just letting people know, the highlighted part at the top of that is that's not part of the bylaw. It needs to be updated upon the bylaw being finalized, and that has to be approved by the ministry. So just to let people know that that piece of it isn't been completed. It's just here to provide a bit of an idea of what you can expect when it comes to fines when this bylaw is in place. Councillor Kittrus, follow.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have some concerns about this littering, because now that you know, once it gets passed, littering then becomes a nighttime activity, and dumping. And so how's that going to help really reduce the litter? That already happens, and I'm just sort of concerned. So how is that going to be addressed in this? Because it's, once it becomes the law, once you have the complaints, but it's at night, like it even becomes harder to enforce. And so
I think,
what provisions are in that?
Just at a conceptual level, without a bylaw, you can't enforce littering at all. So this goes a long way into providing a bylaw and the associated fines to stop what all of us recognize across the community as an ongoing issue. So I don't know what other option you can take except putting a littering bylaw. Do you have anything to add to that, Satnam or Paul?
No, I mean, but I can add again, I mean, we are relying, a lot of this is going to be complaint based. So if something happens at night, we can still follow up with an investigation in the morning and lay possible charges the following day.
Councillor McElwain?
Thank you. What is there's no definition of refuse in the bylaw as it sits. So I'm just wondering about things like yard waste and such. Is that considered refuse if somebody's dumping their grass clippings on township property, for instance, or something of that nature?
There is a definition of refuse in the bylaw. Means waste, garbage, litter, rubbish, debris, material, refuse, and any other discarded or abandoned commodities of any kind whatsoever. So that would include yard waste, any of those things, yes.
Okay. Second question, just kind of following up on the response to Stephen just a few moments ago. I think what you said is that we want to have the bylaw passed today, but there will be changes to it before it actually becomes a bylaw, approval by the ministry or something of that nature. So I mean, we're passing something, but it isn't final. Is that correct?
Can I just explain that, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
The short form wordings and the set fines, which are on the last page, do not form part of the bylaw. They are set by the regional senior judge, and it's through the Attorney General. There's an approval process. So basically, when you look at these, the wording may be changed, the fines even may be changed, but it's not a local decision. I've had them by the Chief Justice would say, well, fine's too high, and reduce it. So we don't usually make them part of the bylaw, but we put them in there for information. So when you're looking today, you see a fine of $150 and you say, that's maybe too high, or maybe that's too low. That's where the guidance of council really comes from, and putting the fines in here so you can look at them. And we've added fines here, higher for on a water course and environmentally protected areas of $450. So those are the type of things that I would ask you to look at and say, those fines seem appropriate for this. The wording will come later, and it's approved by the Ministry of the Attorney General and then by the regional senior judge, if I might. I hope I haven't made that too complicated.
But I just want to make it clear, though, that the wording of the bylaw, what we're passing today, that'll be the same. It's just that, right?
Yep.
Yes. So it's just that last page that we're talking about. The wording may change, not the bylaw itself.
Yeah.
Okay. Councilor Van Loon?
No, thanks. There's been a lot of good conversation there, but good.
Councilor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. My question would be for, regarding the definition of refuse, my question for Paul would be, would we consider then, if someone were eating an apple and they threw the apple core out, and given that it's organic, and would that be included in the definition of refuse if things are naturally decaying, or an apple core is not the same as a pop can, for example? Can I hear some comments, Paul, on there?
Sure. Yes, it would. To answer it very abruptly, yes, it would fall under the definition, but littering and enforcement are discretionary, and I think you would apply a different standard to somebody who threw an apple core than dumped 3 tires in a water course. So, that's where the standard comes in. It's really in the enforcement of it. And if someone, were to throw an apple, you may say, can you not just take that with you, and not issue a ticket? But somebody dumps 3 tires in a water course, you say, hey, come on, you get a ticket. Okay.
Okay, thanks, councillors. I'll read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington authorizes the mayor and clerk to execute a bylaw for the purposes of maintaining private and public property in a clean, litter-free environment known as the littering bylaw. Mover for that recommendation, Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Foster. All in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thanks, Adnam. Thanks, Paul. Moving on to 7.5, draft procedures bylaw. And this is something that we established in our strategic plan to move ahead with. So this has been pulled together by our clerk and her team. And I'll pass it over at this point to Carrie.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Yes, in keeping with Council's strategic directive and changes to the Municipal Act, staff has prepared a draft procedural bylaw establishing the rules of procedure to be followed by Council and its committees. The purpose of the procedure bylaw is to simply govern calling, location, and proceedings of meetings. A well-constructed procedure bylaw facilitates the business of Council and ensures an efficient and effective meeting. Staff and Legislative Services undertook a comprehensive review of the procedure bylaw in-house, conducting best practice research, which included the review of procedure bylaws of several Ontario municipalities, including but not limited to Newmarket, York Region, the cities of Guelph, Kingston, Ottawa, Waterloo, the towns of Erin, Coldbirth, and Mona, all having recent bylaws. We had consideration for changes to the legislation and a review of Bourneau's and Robert's Rules of Order. Staff prepared the bylaw having regard for improving the understanding and clarity of meeting procedures, creating more efficient use of meeting time, incorporating relative and new legislation, improving council meeting experience for members of the public and speakers, members of council and staff. Highlights in the bylaw include a table of contents, which was added to improve navigation throughout the document. Definitions were also added to improve greater clarification. The duties and contact of the chair, members, and attendees were expanded and also clarified. New provisions were added for the selection of a deputy and acting mayor and advisory and ad hoc committees. The order of business was amended to reflect the Committee of the Whole system adopted in 2008, which is now over 12 years old, and also to improve the meeting flow. Presentations and announcements, formerly known as community delegations, were expanded, simplified, and clarified. The rules of debate, voting, points of order, and privilege were simplified and clarified. The procedural placemat that was given to members of council, you'll remember at the Council 101 training, will be updated and given and redistributed for your convenience. We included provisions for reconsideration of a council decision, whether it be at the same meeting or a subsequent meeting. We included and streamlined the provisions for the electronic meeting participation, which council previously adopted. Schedule A outlining the meeting protocols will be reviewed and expanded, allowing for more flexibility and the ability to adapt it if necessary for other types of meetings, such as committee of adjustment or property standards hearings. We clarified and expanded on motions, and we think this may be helpful to council. Motions to defer, to refer, to amend, to call the question, and included a provision to permit friendly amendments to motions, noting which motions are debatable and not non-debatable, etc. We also added a workshop provision as a type of meeting, often for training and education purposes, strategic planning, orientation, those sorts of things. So that's just a general overview of the changes that we made and the highlights, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Carrie. And I just wanted to make a couple of comments before we go around the room and have some discussion with council. There have been some questions lately about procedures, and I think this document goes a long way into clarifying how we do what we do here at council. We want to make sure that we're all on the same page with the rules, the protocols, and the procedures. It will make our meetings a lot more understandable and clear to people who are in the meeting, to staff, and to the public. So this is a long overdue change to our procedures bylaw, and thanks to Carrie and her team for spending a lot of time on this. We really appreciate the work that's gone into it. Okay, so I will we'll go around the room and we'll talk to this, and I'll start with Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. I've read this bylaw. We first received this bylaw just on Thursday, and that leaves us just one business day to review it and to discuss it with constituents. And I have many grave concerns about this bylaw, and even to the point where if my feeling is past this bylaw, then democracy is dead in Center Wellington. there are many, many things wrong with this. Most importantly, this bylaw limits our ability to fulfill our statutory obligation to provide oversight. That is a grave concern to me. I am not in favor of proxy voting, and it's included in the bylaw. I think we need to take a long, hard look at proxy voting. There are many other things wrong with it. Most importantly, what I see is that this procedural bylaw centralizes power in the hands of the head of council and the clerk, and it puts a muzzle on councillors. And with that, I'm very, very concerned about this bylaw, and I cannot support it. I also note that the public has had no input into this bylaw at a time when we're restricting their ability to come to council and speak to us. I note, for example, just this morning, an email delegation was received, and I haven't heard that read into the public meeting today, or into the proceedings rather today. That happened back with Victoria Crescent, where an additional written delegation was ignored. So at a time when we're restricting people's abilities to speak to their elected representatives, with this bylaw, I think it's very important that the public have input into this bylaw. So I have many, many, many concerns about it.
Thanks, Councillor Foster. I just want to clarify a couple things. Firstly, council received this Wednesday afternoon, so you should have had more than one business day to take a look at it. So if there is an issue, then maybe it's with something else with the delivery system or your email. The other thing I wanted to mention is proxy voting was not recommended in this, so that's something that they haven't moved ahead on as a recommendation here, so that's not accurate. And I would be interested in hearing some of the content behind some of the things you're mentioning, and that's why we're bringing this to council now, so we can have some discussion about pieces that are actually in the bylaw. So thanks for your initial discussion, and we'll turn it to Councillor Van Loon for your thoughts.
Thanks, Mayor, through you. I was just been reading through this, and there's one part I missed. I thought I read somewhere that it said electronic meeting participation could be extended indefinitely. Was that in this document? And one of those, but I have some other questions, and they're high level. I don't have a concern with the document. I think we need one as a whole. Just some questions. One would be, there was something under section 1.03, which speaks to suspension of rules. And I'll have to go back up there. And maybe I'm misreading it, where it speaks a little bit of if we wanted to change something, you could use the 2/3 allocation, except if you want to change this bylaw. How do we actually anticipate changing the bylaw then, or this rules? Again, it could be my computer's freezing up here. Then I also have 1.04, which is the clerk. A little bit of a question or maybe clarification on should we be shown the changes if there's some average little changes that are made in regards to the because the clerk definitely, I want to say, tidies up our work sometimes. Sometimes we throw a lot of crazy things at Carrie and Lisa, and so I can understand that sometimes we need to tidy up some of the wording afterwards, but I want to make sure that we don't accidentally have an issue there. And I think it's good that we all agree on the wording. And then something also about a tie vote. So down at the bottom when it speaks about voting, I remember years ago, and I don't think it's happened in this term of council, but when there was a tie vote, I thought the mayor voted twice, and I see that it's not there anymore. And this was years ago. I thought we saw it with Mayor Joanne Razui. I like it that it's clarified that doesn't happen. So that's good to see in there. So hopefully you got my questions there. And
Yeah, so I think I got your three questions there, Steve. So I'll turn it to the clerk to look at the 1.03, 1.04, and I can cover off that there's never a requirement for a mayor to vote twice. That's never been the case. So, but I think our clerk can handle the other 2 points. Carrie?
Okay, yes, through you, Mayor Linton. Section 103, it indicates that there sometimes a procedural bylaw, in order to expedite something, or council, it's a framework for council, but it also, in the interests of time and efficiency, council may suspend the rules of order in order to expedite something or consider something that the bylaw didn't anticipate. So, but that would require 2/3 majority, except under the following circumstances. So where required by law, and off the top of my head, I can't really think of an instant, but amending the procedural bylaw and quorum requirements, those are parts of the bylaw that are important and shouldn't be suspended lightly, should require an actual amendment. So it just gives council some leeway that if there is a requirement for delegations to do something and council wishes to waive or suspend the rules of order, it can be done by 2/3 majority, except in certain circumstances, and those are generally circumstances of a serious nature. The administrative authority of the clerk, that just gives me council's stamp of approval to amend typos and things that small errors or omissions that don't change the intent, don't change the decision by any means, but are glaring errors or technical problems that just need correcting, because the records of council are permanent records, and it would be a shame to see typos throughout the years when a simple correction by the clerk could fix that without bringing it back to the council to fix the spelling mistake. And as far as the voting, I know it's the perception of the mayor breaking the tie, and the mayor, each member of council has the vote, and often the perception is because the mayor either votes last or doesn't raise his hand that he's breaking the tie, and that is a myth, and that's not true. Each member of council has equal voting. It's just usually the show of hands is not always required. Once you receive majority, you move on. And the where there's a tie, that's actually in the Municipal Act. That's dictated. That is not something that we put in there. That is actually spelled out in the legislation. What a tie vote is a loss is specifically in the legislation.
Thanks, Carrie. Councillor McElwain?
I'm getting a message here that my internet connection is unstable. So I don't know if you can hear me or not. I could barely hear what Carrie was saying, and I dropped off for a minute. So can you hear me? You can? Okay. So I do have some concerns about the motion. And Carrie, thank you for your team. Obviously put in a lot of hard work on it, and much of the update was certainly needed. But I just found that it focuses on behavior in meetings and not the purpose of the meeting. And I think the role of council is not mentioned anywhere in the document. And this bylaw pertains to council meetings.
Looks like Councillor McElwain, if you can hear us, we just lost you here. So we're going to let's call a recess for 5 minutes, and hopefully Councillor McWayne can fix his technical issues. So we'll get back at it at 2:15, and hopefully we have Councillor McWayne back.
Councillor McElwain, we just recessed for 5 minutes till 2:15, so you were able to get your internet back up and running.
I'm not sure. To be honest, you're still breaking up on me, so my connection is not very good, I don't think. Yeah, I just got another message saying it's unstable. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you right now, Councillor Kittrus. Or McElwain, sorry.
McElwain, but close enough.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're looking fine and your video's fine right now. So we were just,
Okay. I don't have most people's up. My connection is still not great.
okay. There's only a few videos. Everybody's went to blank screen until we return at 2:15. So hopefully your internet gets a bit better by then.
You were breaking up so badly there, Andy. I couldn't understand what you said. I'm trying to boot up on my tablet and see if that works better.
Okay, we should be all back. Do a quick look around the screen. Councilor McElwain, you're good? We can hear you? You can hear us, I mean? Sorry, I think you're still on mute.
You're still breaking up a little bit. I'm off mute now. You were breaking up just a little bit there, but I could hear you at least. So we'll give it a try
Okay.
and see how this lasts. But I'm still getting the message saying that I'm unstable.
Oh, okay. Your computer's unstable. You're fine, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
At least I think that's what it's referring to. It could be.
Okay, go ahead. You have the floor, Councilor McElwain.
So should I continue? Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you can.
Okay, just to finish off, I don't know where I left out exactly, but it's, I was saying that I thought that the document was focusing on behavior in the meetings, not the purpose of the meeting. And I wanted to go on. George Cuff, who the mayor often quotes, stated in an article called "What Does a Council Do?" Too often, a council sees its role as simply affirming its administration's advice. In some cases, the procedural bylaw works against the council by limiting its access to questions or by thwarting the intent of a councillor to present motions. In some municipalities, the administration puts the agenda together and the council's role is limited to approving pre-written motions. Everything becomes stacked against the notion of a council member being expected to think for themselves or, ironically, to lead. I find that the draft version of this procedural bylaw falls into that category of enabling all the statements, enabling that statement above. Along with ignoring the role of council, the rules of debate, points of order, and points of privilege, when taken together, make me wonder how a genuine debate can take place under any conditions, which seem overly concerned with limiting the ability of an individual councillor to question or criticize ideas being put forward by staff or other members of council. In my opinion, a document of this importance and magnitude cannot be assessed and reviewed properly without sufficient time being allotted in which to do so. An independent ad hoc committee can spend more time in discussion and report back to committee of the whole. Questioning staff on the details of this bylaw and making suggestions designed to improve its content cannot be properly done in such a time-restricted setting as committee of the whole. I'd like to make a motion to defer the motion, a motion to defer this motion until council has more opportunity to review this important document. Could anybody hear me?
Yeah, so sorry, I was just making sure that that the clerk let me know that there's no discussion on a deferral motion, so I wanted to make sure I was following our current procedural bylaw. So that's been, deferral has been moved. So I'll ask for a seconder for that deferral motion, Councillor Foster. And no discussion of a deferral, so we'll call the question. All in favor of deferring this? Okay, so this has been deferred, and it may come back to council in time. Okay. On to the next item, 7.6, water and wastewater billing agreement with Center Wellington Hydro. So we're just going to make sure Wayne Dice doesn't get caught reading all our magazines in our waiting room. Okay, we're ready to go. Did you have a good time in our waiting room, Wayne? I'll turn things over to you now. Can you hear?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship and council members. Sorry about that. I was just finishing up that good article in the magazine, as you mentioned. So I just read the report here and reviewed it again. The report itself actually came from township staff, of course, and but I just wanted to add just a point, and one of the reasons why it's so important for Central Wellington Hydro to review this agreement and get it duly signed. Central Wellington Hydro, we are regulated, as you know, by the Ontario Energy Board, and one of the regulations under that is complying with the Affiliate Relationships Code, and it's the OEB that administers that code, so to speak. And the code sets out rules that govern the conduct and interactions between utilities and affiliates, and in this case, our shareholder. So we need this water agreement to show the regulator that we're following the rules, and we're using fully allocated costs to perform the billing services and billing functions that we do to bill the water and wastewater for the township, and that it's at a fair price and reflective of fair market prices for these types of services. As mentioned in the report, the past billing agreement it has become quite dated, and so staff, both township staff and Central Wellington Hydro staff, have been working together over the last year to create the attached agreement, and the agreement, of course, outlines the practices that we have been using and have been in place between the township and Central Wellington for some time now. But there were some updates to the sections that needed to happen, and it's been a number of years since this agreement's been signed. Of course, it's been reviewed. We make sure on a regular basis that the billing processes are accurate, and we work closely with the township. But it is important to make sure we have the legal agreement in place for the protection of both parties, the township and Central Wellington Hydro. So that was just kind of the points that I wanted to make, and I'm not sure if Dan has anything specific to add to the report, but I do have Heather Dowling here in a meeting with me. Heather's the Vice President and Treasurer of Central Wellington Hydro, so I'm really prepared for any tough questions you might have.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Wayne. My mistake. I see that Dan was the author of the report, so I should have turned it to him first. Sorry about that, Dan. I'll turn it to you now, though.
Thanks, Mayor Linton. Thanks, Wayne. You did most of the work for me. The only thing left really is the financial implications to the township. As Wayne mentioned, the previous agreement is quite dated. It actually goes back to the transition board at amalgamation 1998. We've been paying $1.05 per bill since 2008. So that rate per bill for collection and billing services hasn't changed since 2008, and it was actually higher prior to 2008. You can see the township's impact on billing for 2020 is estimated at $184,500, and the per billing rate of $1.05 is per water and per wastewater billing that is done on a monthly basis. So with that, we're requesting that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign the agreements on behalf of the township, and Wayne has already looked after signatures on the Central Wellington Hydro side.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dan. Turning it to Council McCray.
I have no questions.
Councilor Dunsmore.
Questions?
Councilor Kittredge.
No questions.
Councilor McWayne.
No questions.
Councilor Van Leeuwen.
No, it makes sense. Thanks.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. I do want to support this recommendation, and Mayor, if you'll grant me a little bit of latitude, I do have a question for Wayne. Wayne, earlier in our meeting, we spoke about a vital services bylaw, and it crossed my mind thinking about the hydro regulator. And in brief, Wayne, the bylaw deals with landlords not being able to cut off hydro for their tenants in the basically in the wintertime. And I wondered, Wayne, if you could just speak to that, just because, quite frankly, because you're here and because you have knowledge in the area. What do you have any comments about us passing a bylaw controlling rather the ability of landlords to cut off the power in their tenants' units, and what is the role of the regulator? And if you could just provide us, Wayne, some general comments, I think it would be very informative. So that's my question, Wayne. Maybe you could speak to that.
Sure, take a minute. Through your worship, I'm not familiar with the bylaw, of course, Councillor Foster. I would assume that it has to do with protecting tenants, but as you mentioned, we are regulated by the Ontario Energy Board, and the Ontario Energy Board, they certainly do see themselves as protecting electric users and customers, whether they be landlords or tenants. And we are coming up on the November 1st date, which starting on November 1st, there are no disconnections of residential electricity allowed to take place throughout the winter until May 1st of each year. And this year, due to the COVID-19 emergency pandemic, of course, that was extended out to September 1st, which I think was very helpful to some customers that were struggling financially through at least the start of the pandemic. So we follow those rules that are laid out by the Energy Board. But I guess more importantly, what I would like to just add is that we do our utmost to work with our customers when they're struggling. I did hear some of the conversation about air conditioning. There are no regulations in the summer as far as electric use and air conditioners and disconnection, not being allowed to do disconnections because of AC. But regardless of the rules, we do try and work with our customers and provide flexibility for them, and come up with different options for payment arrangements. So that I guess would be the key for us, is that relationship with the customer. So it's not really not really the same as, I guess, what the what you guys were speaking about in regards to a bylaw. It's strictly and solely electric use. Hope that shines a little bit of light on that, Councillor Foster.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne, for handling that outside the scope of this item. I have a recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington authorize the mayor and clerk to execute an agreement with respect to a water and wastewater billing agreement with Center Wellington Hydro. Move for that recommendation. Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor McCray. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you very much, Wayne. Feel free to stick with us for the rest of the hour, but if you have to, we understand. You have to go, we understand.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thanks, Wayne. Moving on to 7.7, demolition control, 265 Gowrie Street in Fergus, and we have a report from our chief building official, Randy. Welcome, Randy. Sorry, he's in the waiting room too. We're letting him in now. We have a pretty strict protocol when we let people into these meetings, so he's just going through security as we speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, members of council. Am I muted still?
No, we can hear you.
Okay,
Good
good.
afternoon to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So before you this afternoon, I've got two demolition control applications. The first one is for 265 Gowrie Street, and that's in the former town of Fergus. It's a fairly small house. The owner would like to demolish it and rebuild a new home on the property. It is not recorded in the Township of Center Wellington Municipal Heritage Register, nor is it designated. And I would be pleased to take any questions on this report.
Thanks, Randy. Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to speak in favor of this motion. I had a look at this house myself, and it's a very ordinary home that is unspectacular. I would agree with our building inspector that it's not a heritage home. It's quite an ordinary small home, and so I'll be prepared to support this.
Councillor Van Oort?
I support this.
Councillor McLean?
No questions.
Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for Randy. I was wondering what the date of this property was, and if there was a log cabin perhaps underneath it.
The house was built in 1952. It's a one-story structure, and I do not believe that there is a log cabin underneath it. The house only dates from 1952.
Thanks, Randy. Councillor Dunsmore?
No questions. I'm in favor.
Councillor McCrae?
No questions.
I'll read the recommendation of the Council of the Township of Center Wellington approves the issuance of a demolition permit to demolish the single detached dwelling located at 265 Gowrie Street, former town of Fergus. Mover for that recommendation? Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Moving on to 7.8, demolition control for 6107 Fourth Line East in the former township of Pilkington. Turn it back over to Randy.
Thank you, Mayor Linton and members of council. This demolition control application is for 6107 Fourth Line East. That's in the former township of Pilkington. Now, this house in particular is in very rough shape. It's got a number of structural issues as well as not much in the way of a foundation, we'll say that. So the house was built in 1900. It's a two-story, 1,344 square foot single detached dwelling. The owner, because the home is in such poor repair, it's more cost effective to remove the dwelling and reconstruct a new home. I can tell you that it's not recorded in the Township of Center Wellington Municipal Heritage Register, and it's not designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And I would be pleased to take any questions you may have.
Thanks, Randy. Turning it over to Council. Councillor McCrae?
No questions, Mayor Linton.
Councillor Dunsmore?
No questions.
Councillor Kittrus? Councillor Kittrus?
Hi, thank you, Mayor. Randy, are they building another house on top of this? Or is this just a demolition because it's a farm that somebody else owns?
through you, Mayor Linton, Councillor Kittredge, they have expressed that their intent is to build another house.
Councillor McElwain,
No questions.
Councillor Van Leeuwen,
No questions.
Councillor Foster,
Thank you, Mayor. My question for Randy is just simply, have they applied for a building permit? And really what I'm asking Randy is, their intention would be to build just a single home for a single family? Would I be correct in that?
Through you, Mayor Linton, Councillor Foster, yeah. So they haven't applied for a building permit to build a new house just yet. And what I can tell you is that on their application to demolish the house, they have indicated to us that the reason for demolition, and I'm quoting from their application, to remove a dwelling that is in poor repair and reconstruct a new dwelling. So just one house, which is what would be permitted on the property.
Right.
I'll read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington approves the issuance of a demolition permit to demolish the single detached dwelling located at 6107 4th Line East, former Township of Pilkington. Mover for that recommendation? Councillor McElwain, seconded by Councillor Kittredge. All in favor? And that carries. Thanks, Randy. Moving on to 7.9, a part lot control exemption bylaw, parts 3 and 4 of the plan, and I'll turn it over to Brett at this time.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. This is a part lot control exemption that you've seen a number of before. The unique thing about this one is it applies only to two townhouse units in a block. There was a previous bylaw passed. This property is in the South Ridge subdivision, and these townhouses were built with the first phase, but for whatever reason, the two of the units were not conveyed. And so the bylaw that when we do a bylaw, it expires after a period of time. And that bylaw was passed in 2011. The expiry is usually 3 years, so it would have expired in 2014. And the units haven't been conveyed. So now in order to be able to convey either of those two units, we need to pass a new bylaw. And that's what's before you today.
So Brett, this is just cleaning up, right?
Yeah, it's an administrative thing. The permission to convey the units or to have part lot control is kind of a unique thing. So as the units get conveyed, the bylaw would expire. So on this particular case, they haven't been conveyed, so we need to do a bylaw again. Unfortunately, there's no sort of short circuit or ask for an extension. We have to pass a new bylaw.
Okay, thanks, Brett. Councillor Foster?
No questions, Your Worship. I think this is a pretty routine item, and perhaps we can even call the question just in the interest of saving some time.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Yeah, no questions.
Councillor McElwain?
No questions.
Councillor Kittredge?
No questions, Mayor.
Councillor Dunstmore?
No questions.
Councillor McCray?
No questions, Mayor Linton.
All in favor? And that's carried. Moving on to partial demolition of a listed heritage property on St. George Street in Fergus, and I'll turn it over to our heritage planner, senior planner, Mariana. Welcome, Mariana.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Linton, to members of council. So this report before you is for partial demolition at the listed heritage property known as 515 St. George Street East in the former town of Fergus. The the property is listed on the register as a non-designated property. So for any demolition, and this applies to the next two properties as well. So for all three, any demolition, even for partial demolition for any structure on the property, requires a 60-day notice to council. And in this case, 515 St. George Street East, it is for demolition of a one-story rear addition that was added much later to the property in the 1970s, as well as a carport. So the demolition is only for those two elements. The original house, which is an 1880 stone dwelling, will remain intact. And the owner, the demolition is occurring because of the poor condition of the addition and carport. And the owner would like to reconstruct the addition at the rear of the property with an attached garage. So this has gone before the Heritage Committee and at its meeting on October 13th, and the Heritage Committee had no concerns with this demolition. So the recommendation is that the demolition be permitted. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mariana. Questions from council? Councillor Foster?
No questions, Your Worship.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
No questions.
Councillor McElwain?
Thank you, Mayor. Mariana, when adding an addition to an existing heritage building, does it have to follow some strict guidelines about looking like the heritage building that it's attached to? Because this addition seems to be quite modern looking compared to the stone building that it's being attached to. So I'm curious what the rules are about that.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Linton. Yes, there are generally accepted heritage principles that we always use to assess applications like this. In this case, because the property is only listed, it's only the demolition that actually comes before council for approval and before the Heritage Committee. If it was a designated heritage property, then they would require a heritage permit for any alterations. So we don't get heavily involved in the new construction on a listed property, because there's little authority to do so. Really, there's no required process. However, we do meet with the owners, so they attend the meeting when they discuss the demolition, and we review the plans with them. So the Heritage Committee does ask questions, and we tend to give them the guiding principles. So in the case of this application or any demolition and then addition or new addition, what we're looking at mostly is that the materials that the addition sort of be compatible with and sympathetic to the original design, and that it not overpower it. So in this case, it's set completely behind the house. So what you want to do always is maintain the original dwelling as the centerpiece and the showcase, and then the rest should be set far back. It should be different materials, not trying to match, but rather be distinguishable so that we know that it is a new addition and it keeps the building legible. So those are some examples of sort of the types of principles that we look at, and we do provide to the applicant when we're discussing, but again, we don't have any, there's no permit process here for the new addition. I hope that answers the question.
Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have any questions on this.
Councillor Dunsmore?
No questions.
Councillor McCray?
No questions.
And I'll read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington endorse the partial demolition request for the one-story rear addition and carport at the listed property municipally known as 515 St. George Street East in Ferguson, the Township of Center Wellington, and that the property municipally known as 515 St. George Street East Fergus remains on the Township's Municipal Heritage Register. Mover for that recommendation, Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? and that's carried. Moving on to 7.11, partial demolition of a listed property on Sophia Street in Salem. Mariana?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Linton. Similar to the previous application, this report is for the partial demolition on a property that is listed on the Heritage Register as a property of interest. It is not designated. 35 Sophia Street is on the south side of the street between Aqua and Herb Streets, and again is an 1870 dwelling. The demolition is not going to impact the original portion of the structure of the dwelling. It is only for the one-story rear sunroom addition, which was added much later. And again, it's for due to its poor condition and the owner's intent to construct a new 1.5-story addition at the rear of the property. Again, this went to the Heritage Committee at its meeting on October 13th, where the the applicant was present, the architect, and explained the demolition intent and the new construction that's proposed. And after a discussion, the committee decided or agreed that there were no concerns with the demolition and that it should be permitted to proceed. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mariana. Councillor Foster? Councillor Van Leeuwen?
No questions.
Councillor McLean?
No questions.
Councillor Kittrus?
No questions, thanks.
Councillor Dunsmore?
No questions.
Councillor McCray?
No questions.
I'll read the recommendation of the Council of the Township of Center Wellington approve the partial demolition request for the one-story rear sunroom addition at the listed property municipally known as 35 Sophia Street in Salem in the Township of Center Wellington, and that the property municipally known as 35 Sophia Street in Salem remains on the Township's Municipal Heritage Registry. Move to that recommendation. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCray. All in favor? And that carries. Moving on to 7.2, partial demolition of a listed heritage property on Garifraxa Street in Fergus. Mariana?
Thank you. Through Mayor Linton. So this demolition is similarly for a listed property, not a designated property, at 325 Garifraxa Street West in the former town of Fergus. It is for a detached 3-bay garage that was built in 2001. Apparently is in very poor condition and was not constructed. It does not serve the owner's current needs in terms of fitting their vehicles in the garage. So they're proposing to demolish and again reconstruct in a very similar location, similar size, a 3-bay garage. And it went to the Heritage Committee on October 13th, and the committee did not have any objection to the demolition. Pleased to answer questions. Thank you.
The artist's rendering of the new garage looks very attractive. Councillors, Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a brief question for Mariana. What are the regulations with more than 2 bays garages, Mariana? I'm a little unclear on what has to happen to have a 3-bay or even a 4-bay garage.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Linton. So garages are known as accessory buildings, and in our zoning bylaw, we have regulations for accessory buildings that cover both height, setbacks, and then lot coverage. So the lot coverage is really kind of what would determine the area of a garage that would be proposed. So we do have coverage restrictions of typically 10% of typical lot coverage would be for an accessory building or for total accessory buildings. And then that also gets included in the overall coverage for a property, which typically in a heritage area would be 30% total coverage. So all of the buildings do get included. So there's nothing specifically that says how large a garage can be other than the coverage that restricts it and the setbacks.
Thanks, Mariana. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
No questions.
Councillor McLean?
No questions.
Councillor Kittrus?
No questions.
Councilor McCray? Sorry, Councilor Dunsmore?
Questions?
I try to fool you there. Councilor McCray?
No questions.
I'll read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington approve the partial demolition request for the detached garage at the listed property municipally known as 325 Gare Praxis Street West in Ferguson, Township of Center Wellington, and that the property municipally known as 325 Gare Praxis Street West, Fergus remains on the Township's Municipal Heritage Registry. I will move for that recommendation, Councilor Foster, seconded by Councilor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? And that is carried. Thanks, Mariana, for bringing those to us today. 713, updates to the Wellington County chapter of the Grand River Source Protection Plan. And I see that Kyle is with us now. I'll turn it over to Kyle Davis, our risk management official. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you very much, Mayor Linton. Pleased to be here today. The purpose of this report is to provide council the opportunity to review and consider changes to the Wellington County chapters of the Grand River Source Protection Plan and Assessment Report, in particular the water quantity and the Tier 3 amendments. And this is a follow-up to the council presentation in September with myself and Martin Keller from the GRCA. There are a number of changes included for Center Wellington, as well as for Mapleton, Erin, and Puslinch. Since we last presented to council in September, we've made a number of changes you'll see to the draft policies in response to legal council, staff, and municipal council and ministry environment comments. So just overall quickly, there's been some changes to defined terms and a greater use and consistency of defined terms. Specific reference to the ability to update the official plan and the zoning bylaws for water quantity. There's also a number of changes to the provincial approval policies. These are around the Permits to Take Water and Aggregate Resources Act to strengthen wording. So, for example, changes from should to shall consider, and also to respond to some technical ministry comments in regards to the recharge policies. We improved the linkage between some of the quality policies, so stormwater in particular, and recharge. And we made an explicit reference to the Water Supply Master Plan in the provincial approval policies, so the Permits to Take Water and the ARA policies. And there's also some edits to the planning policy to broaden from the permit to take water to 50,000 liters per day. I'd be pleased to take any questions or comments on the report.
Thanks very much, Kyle. Questions from council? Councilor Foster? Councilor Van Leeuwen?
No questions.
Councilor McElwain?
No questions.
Councilor Kittrus?
No questions.
Councilor Dunsmore?
No question.
Councilor McCray?
Yes, I have a couple. First of all, it's a great document. One question I have, Kyle, is will all future permit to take water applications be run through the Tier 3 model?
Thank you for the question, Councilor McCray. Through you, Mayor Linton. Ultimately, that would be the decision of the Ministry of Environment, as they retain approval authority for permits to take water. So certainly that is the recommendation of the policies, that they would look to use the Tier 3 model, but they would, the Ministry of Environment would make the decision on whether each individual application would be run through. They may determine that there's some applications that are maybe smaller takings, maybe just above the 50,000, or for other reasons they don't feel have potential to have a larger impact, that they may choose not to run through the model.
Okay, thank you. My other question is related to Schedule V map. Just looking at it, I thought it would be helpful for the layperson if you could show, say, a shadow outline of Center Wellington's Whippaque extending into Woolwich, as occurred in Schedule W for Erin's.
Through you, Mayor Linton, absolutely. I can take that feedback back to the GRCA, and I'm sure they would be pleased to make that change.
Thank you. And then I guess the other question is related to Schedule Z, where it shows the issue contributing area for Quistledge. We do have issue contributing areas for Center Wellington. I assume there haven't been any further changes to that, and that's why it's not shown in this current document?
Yes, through Mayor Linton, that's correct. That's correct. So the schedule that are shown in the pre-consultation notice have not been changed.
Okay, thank you. And then final question is, will this document need to be updated to reflect the new proposed legislation regarding a municipality's veto of a permit to take water?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, likely not. The document would likely not need to be updated to reflect that. That would be a separate process under the Ontario Water Resources Act that's been proposed by the Ministry of Environment. That would work in parallel with this, but is actually applicable across the province.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. I will read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington receive as information report IS 2020-20 dated October 19th, 2020 on updates to the Wellington County chapter of the Grand River Source Protection Plan, and that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington hereby provides a municipal resolution to the Grand River Source Protection Authority in support of the proposed updates to the Wellington County chapters of the Grand River Source Protection Plan and Assessment Report, as outlined in the pre-consultation notice dated October 5th, 2020. Can I have a mover for that recommendation? Councillor McCray, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much, Kyle.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to information items, we have two items there. We have minutes from the Heritage Center Wellington meeting on August the 11th, and we have the Committee of the Whole tracking list. Any questions from council on any of those items? Councillor Kittrus, you wanted to speak about the Heritage Center Wellington minutes?
Yes, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm wondering if Mary Anna or perhaps Councillor Van Leeuwen could explain 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3, and sort of 6.1. It sort of has. I don't really understand what that is all about, and perhaps I could get an explanation, but that doesn't. It's not clear.
I don't think Marianne is on the call anymore. I don't see her here. She dealt with hers, and I don't know if there's anything that Brett can speak to about that. I don't know. Go ahead.
I can take a crack at it. Under the Heritage Act, so referring to the first one, delegation of authority, we have a bylaw today, and under the Heritage Act, there's permission in the Heritage Act for under certain circumstances for certain types of modifications to a heritage building for authority to be delegated to staff. So Marianne has raised it through those minutes, asked the committee if we should update that bylaw. We have many more designations now. We have the listing that we didn't have before. So that was an introduction to that conversation. Also, the demolition control bylaw was enacted before we had any kind of heritage register. So again, the question that be discussed at the Heritage Committee is whether or not it's possible to delegate some authority. For example, we had two on the agenda today for demolitions for houses that weren't on the heritage register. So we developed the registry so that there was a process that they would have to go through. So the question is, do we still need the demolition control bylaw, or can we improve the process to help expedite some of those applications where they're not listed or designated, like the two we had today? The cultural heritage landscape study, we're looking to bring that forward for presentation to council in November. And the bridge update was a result of the Part 2 order request we had on the other bridges that have subsequently council talked about designating, decided not to. But I think at the meeting there was some proactive want to look at the bridges that are coming up in future years in the capital budget. That's what those 3 items are about.
Thanks, Brett. Any other questions about the information items? Okay, motion to adjourn. Councillor Kittredge, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? And we're adjourned at 3:01. I was trying to make it by 3. Have a great rest of the afternoon.